There is something happening inside your body right now that you may have been quietly ignoring for months, not because you do not care about your health, not because you are careless or uninformed about what your body needs, but because the signs were subtle and easy to rationalize away. They did not arrive like a sudden alarm. They crept in slowly, one small signal at a time, disguised as a rough week or a season of being overwhelmed. And somewhere along the way, without even meaning to, you stopped noticing them. You adapted, adjusted, and told yourself it would pass. This is the story of what your body has been trying to communicate and why those signals matter far more than most people ever realize. Because the body does not collapse without warning. It sends small messages through discomfort, through subtle changes in how you feel day after day. They are the body's attempt at communication, sent through the only channels available: physical sensation, emotional shift, and a quiet but persistent sense that something is wrong. It communicates through symptoms so ordinary that most people never think to question them. And when those messages are ignored long enough, they grow louder. Understanding what these signals are and why your body sends them is the first step toward recovering from the kind of exhaustion sleep alone cannot fix. Most people live their entire lives inside a body they never fully listen to. They manage symptoms. They push through discomfort. They treat the body as something to overcome rather than understand. Let us start with the sign that most people misunderstand. You were getting enough sleep, 7 hours, sometimes 8. You were following the advice you had been given, but you still woke up exhausted. Your eyes burned when they opened. Your body felt heavy before you even stood up from bed. Your brain moved slowly through the first hour of every morning. And instead of questioning why, most people simply blame themselves for not sleeping enough. They assume they need more hours in bed, or better sleep hygiene, or an earlier bedtime. But the research points to something more important than duration. Studies published across multiple peer-reviewed journals show clearly that sleep quality matters more than sleep duration when it comes to genuine physical recovery. Two people can spend the exact same number of hours in bed and wake up feeling completely different. What separates them is not the clock. It is what their body was actually doing during those hours. True restorative sleep requires the body to move through complete cycles of deep and REM sleep. When those cycles proceed without significant disruption, the body repairs cellular damage, regulates hormones, and allows the brain to reset its neurochemistry fully. But when chronic stress is present in the hours before sleep, when cortisol levels remain elevated because the nervous system never decompresses, those cycles are disrupted. The immune system strengthens. The cardiovascular system recovers. The hormonal balance that governs mood, energy, and focus has the chance to return to its natural, sustainable rhythm. The body stays in lighter stages of sleep. Deep sleep becomes fragmented. REM sleep is cut short before it can do its restorative work. So you spend 8 hours in bed, but your body never crosses into the kind of rest it actually needs to recover from the day before. Research from the National Institutes of Health confirms that recovery from chronic sleep restriction is not as simple as sleeping longer the next night. Different biological functions recover at different rates. Cognitive performance, emotional regulation, and physical energy do not all bounce back at the same time, which means your body may carry the effects of weeks of poor sleep quality long after you believe the problem has already been resolved. The tiredness you woke up with was not laziness. A study published in the journal PLOS One found that sleep quality predicted life satisfaction far better than duration did. Quality was the variable that mattered most. Duration without quality produces a body that has spent time in bed but has not recovered from anything. And the longer that pattern goes unaddressed, the deeper the deficit grows, until the exhaustion stops feeling like a symptom and starts feeling like simply who you are. The second sign is easy to rationalize away. You stopped feeling genuinely excited about the things that used to matter to you, but not in a dramatic way. That shift is one of the most dangerous things chronic exhaustion does. It does not just deplete you. It changes what you believe you are capable of feeling again. There was no obvious sadness, no clear reason you could identify. Your favorite music just did not land the same way anymore. You might have been convinced it was simply the natural consequence of getting older, taking on more responsibility, or having less time to devote to the things that once brought you joy. Things that used to spark anticipation felt flat. Hobbies that once absorbed your full attention started feeling like effort that produced no real reward in return. Conversations you used to look forward to started feeling draining before they even began. You were not depressed in the clinical sense. You could still function. But something had gone quiet inside you. A kind of emotional muting you might have dismissed as stress or maturity or simply being too busy to enjoy things. Scientists have a precise term for this. It is called anhedonia, and the neuroscience behind it is well established across decades of peer-reviewed research. Chronic stress triggers a cascade of chemical and hormonal changes that directly affect the systems responsible for motivation, anticipation, and reward processing in the brain. Research on stress-induced anhedonia confirms that prolonged stress disrupts the brain's mesolimbic dopamine system, the neural circuit that drives the feeling of wanting something. This is the circuit responsible for the motivation to pursue goals and for the satisfaction that follows when those goals are finally achieved. Under normal conditions, this system generates the forward pull that makes life feel engaging and worth pursuing. It is what makes you genuinely look forward to things. When this system is healthy, you wake up with something to look forward to. You feel the pull toward the future. You experience what scientists call approach motivation. It is what makes music feel electric when it captures something you are feeling. What makes a project feel worth the effort when the outcome truly matters to you. But when the stress response is chronically elevated, the glucocorticoid hormones released begin to interact destructively with dopamine transmission in the reward pathways of the brain. The reward circuitry down-regulates, the signal weakens, and the world that used to feel full of texture and meaning starts to feel flat and far away. This is not a character flaw. It is the predictable biological consequence of a nervous system that has been running at high activation for too long. The brain was not broken. It was protecting itself by reducing the intensity of reward signals it no longer had the capacity to properly process or sustain. The muting you felt was the cost of that protection. The third sign showed up in your body, not just your mind. You started feeling physically weak for no reason. Not the satisfying tiredness that follows real effort. Not the soreness that makes sense after exercise. Walking upstairs felt harder than it used to. Carrying ordinary things felt unexpectedly draining. Standing for longer than a few minutes made your legs feel slow and heavy in a way that made no sense. Simple physical tasks required noticeably more energy than they once did, and the almost universal instinct is to assume you have simply become less fit over time. But that explanation misses what is actually happening at the level of the body's core systems. Physical energy is not generated by a single process working alone. People in this state often push harder, believing effort will compensate for the energy deficit. But effort without recovery does not produce strength. It deepens the depletion further. It is the output of multiple systems working in coordinated balance. Oxygen delivery, cellular nutrition, hydration, hormonal regulation, and sleep-based repair all contribute to how much energy you produce. When chronic stress is maintained over weeks and months, cortisol levels remain persistently elevated. And sustained cortisol disrupts metabolic efficiency in ways that go beyond simply feeling anxious. It interferes with cellular energy production. It impairs the repair processes that normally happen during deep sleep. It affects insulin sensitivity and nutrient absorption throughout the body. It diverts blood flow and resources toward the systems the body considers essential in a perceived state of threat, which means everything else operates below its normal capacity. Your muscles do not receive the recovery they need. Your cells do not receive optimal fuel. The body begins conserving what it has rather than generating what you need. That heaviness in your limbs, that resistance when you tried to move through the day, was not a fitness problem. That was biology managing a resource deficit it could not resolve. The fourth sign arrived in how you responded to ordinary pressure. Small things started feeling enormous. A minor miscommunication set off anxiety that was completely out of proportion. A simple mistake at work felt catastrophic rather than correctable. The patience you once had seemed to dissolve without warning, even in situations that did not used to bother you. You might have caught yourself snapping at someone you care about over something trivial, or feeling sudden irritability at a situation your calmer self would have navigated without difficulty. This is not a personality change. It is a neurological consequence of a system that has been under sustained stress without sufficient recovery between demands over time. The American Psychological Association includes increased emotional reactivity as a defining feature of burnout. The clinical neuroscience explains precisely why this happens in the brain. The prefrontal cortex is the region responsible for rational thinking, emotional regulation, and the ability to assess that a situation is manageable rather than catastrophic. It is what allows you to pause before reacting, to consider context, and to choose a measured response rather than simply producing a reactive and disproportionate one. But the prefrontal cortex is also the most resource-intensive region of the brain. When the body is depleted, it is among the first systems to lose functioning resources. Meanwhile, the amygdala, which processes perceived threat and generates the fear response, becomes comparatively more dominant. Regulation diminishes. Reactivity increases. The world starts to feel genuinely overwhelming. You were not overreacting. Your nervous system had run out of the buffer it normally uses to absorb ordinary pressure without being destabilized and pushed toward reactive response. The fifth sign was the one most people dismissed most quickly: the headaches. Not severe migraines, just a low-grade pressure behind the eyes, a tightness across the temples. It is worth noting that most of the people who experience these recurring headaches never connect them to the broader picture of what their body is managing. They treat each one separately. This is why rest is not optional when it comes to emotional stability. Patience is not a virtue you are born with or without. It is a resource the body produces under the right conditions. A dull ache at the base of the skull that kept returning several times a week, then with increasing frequency until it felt almost permanent and unavoidable. You probably took something for the pain and went back to what you were doing, but those headaches were not coincidental or random. They were a direct message. The National Institutes of Health confirms that tension-type headaches, among the most prevalent forms of head pain in modern populations, are linked to a specific cluster of triggers. Chronic stress causes the muscles of the neck, shoulders, face, scalp, and jaw to maintain a state of persistent contraction that compresses nerves and restricts blood flow. Dehydration, even at mild levels, causes measurable changes in the brain's fluid balance. Those changes activate pain receptors in the membranes surrounding the brain itself. Poor sleep quality significantly lowers the threshold at which pain is registered. The body becomes more sensitive to signals a well-rested system would typically dampen or ignore entirely, and screen time adds its own substantial contribution. Research published in peer-reviewed medical journals shows clearly that extended screen use significantly increases the frequency of tension-type headaches. Reduced blinking during screen use dries and strains the ocular muscles. The sustained forward head position most people adopt places significant load on the muscles at the base of the skull. Blue light exposure overstimulates the visual cortex and disrupts the hormonal processes the brain needs to decompress. Those headaches were a signal from a system stretched beyond sustainable limits. The sixth sign was written in your vision: blurred edges when you looked up from a screen. Dry, scratchy, irritated eyes that drops, and blinking could not quite relieve. This is why people who stare at screens late into the night often report feeling wired but tired simultaneously. The brain is overstimulated, The body is depleted. They are both telling the truth. A heaviness behind the eyes at the end of the day, a new sensitivity to bright light that had not been part of your experience before. Most people attribute this entirely to screen time, and screen time is certainly a contributing factor. But the fuller explanation is more systemic than most people realize. Your eyes are directly connected to the central nervous system, fed by the same neural networks that carry the load of chronic stress and overload through the rest of your body. The visual cortex, the region of the brain that processes everything you see, is one of the most metabolically demanding areas in the entire human brain. It requires a continuous and substantial supply of glucose, oxygen, and neural resources to function at normal capacity throughout the day and into the evening hours. When the body is depleted and the stress response is chronically elevated, the visual system experiences the same resource pressure as every other system in the body. The ocular muscles that control focus and eye movement fatigue more quickly. The tear film that lubricates the eye surface is disrupted by the dramatically reduced blink rate during screen use. Research on digital eye strain confirms that screen use reduces blinking to a fraction of its normal rate, leaving the eye surface dry, irritated, and increasingly sensitive to light. The heaviness you felt behind your eyes was not simply the result of staring at a screen. It was the downstream signal of a system running beyond its sustainable limits. The seventh sign is perhaps the most difficult to describe because it does not fit neatly into a category or produce a specific measurable symptom you can point to clearly. You just did not feel like yourself. Not sick enough to call a doctor. Not well enough to feel genuinely good. There was a quiet, persistent wrongness. A low-grade sense that something was off, that you could not locate or name, but also could not fully shake, no matter how many good days came in a row. A subtle disconnection between the version of yourself you used to inhabit and the person you felt like now, like going through the motions from a slight remove. Clinicians who study burnout and chronic stress describe this vague sense of unease as one of the most diagnostically significant early signals the body is capable of producing. It appears before the more obvious physical deterioration, before the immune system begins to visibly suffer, before the emotional collapse becomes undeniable to the people around you. The body senses the accumulation of deficit before the conscious mind is prepared to name it. That quiet wrongness is the nervous system exceeding its threshold for sustainable function. It is the biological equivalent of a warning light on the dashboard, not the kind that triggers immediate emergency, but the kind that appears weeks before something more significant breaks. Animals show this same capacity. They reduce activity, seek rest, and pull inward long before an illness becomes visible. Humans have the same biological intelligence, but we have learned to override it. Most people look at that warning light, note that the car is still running, and decide to deal with it later. And later keeps getting pushed further away. The body always whispers before it screams. That persistent feeling of something being off was the whisper. And it deserved to be heard long before it was dismissed. The eighth sign is the one that makes all the others worse, because it is not a physical symptom. It happens in the space between feeling the signs and acting on them. You normalized feeling terrible. You looked around at the people in your life and saw that they were tired too, stressed too, running on empty too, just like you. The science calls this adaptation level theory. When a negative condition is sustained long enough, the nervous system recalibrates it as normal. Not because it is normal, but because it is familiar. And you concluded that what you were experiencing was simply the unavoidable condition of being a person living a busy, demanding, connected, modern life. Not a warning, just the cost. So you kept going. You kept pushing through mornings when getting out of bed felt genuinely impossible. You kept dismissing the headaches as something a painkiller could manage for another day. You kept rationalizing the flatness, the heaviness, and the reactivity as temporary, as the inevitable consequence of having a full life, as nothing serious enough to actually stop and address. Research reviewed across dozens of studies on burnout recognition describes this normalization as one of the most defining and most dangerous features of the condition in its progression. This is the cruelest aspect of burnout. It does not announce itself dramatically. It simply makes the idea of addressing it feel unnecessary, until addressing it feels genuinely impossible. When physical and emotional exhaustion go unaddressed long enough, the symptoms stop functioning as signals. They start functioning as the new baseline against which everything else is measured. You stop comparing how you feel now to how you felt when you were genuinely healthy. You start comparing how you feel today to how badly you felt last week. And as long as today is not measurably worse, you decide you are fine. But fine is not the same as healthy. Getting through the day is not the same as thriving. The American Psychological Association notes that in more advanced stages of burnout, the exhaustion and detachment begin to genuinely feel like the norm rather than a condition to address. The body adapts to chronic depletion the same way it adapts to any persistent condition. It recalibrates expectations downward. It lowers the internal standard for what recovery should feel like. And eventually, you stop expecting to feel well at all. You begin treating genuine energy and health as something that belonged to a younger, less burdened version of yourself. But that framing is not accurate. The capacity for recovery does not disappear with age or responsibility. What disappears is the protected space in which recovery is allowed to happen. Real recovery requires something that chronic stress makes profoundly difficult to access. It requires genuine, deliberate rest, not passive inactivity, not the exhausted collapse that follows relentless demand. Real rest that signals safety to the nervous system. Sleep that is protected, consistent, and allowed to run through its full natural cycles without interruption, night after night. Periods of genuine disengagement from stimulation, from urgency, from the feeling that something always needs your attention right now. These are not luxuries. They are biological requirements. Here is what all 8 of these signs share when you look at them together. None of them arrived loudly. None demanded immediate action. None said in plain language that something needed to change. A body that never receives genuine rest cannot regulate itself properly. It cannot distinguish between real threat and imagined pressure. It cannot produce the emotional and physical resources it needs. They were quiet, gradual, and easy to rationalize one day at a time. And that is precisely what makes them so significant and so consistently overlooked by the people experiencing them. The science of chronic stress is consistent and well supported across decades of research. Prolonged stress is not simply a mental experience. It is a profound and measurable biological one. It changes the architecture and chemistry of sleep. It disrupts the dopamine systems of motivation and reward. It alters how the nervous system evaluates what is threatening and what is safe. It impairs pain regulation, reduces the efficiency of cellular energy production, and erodes the cognitive buffer that allows clear thinking and emotional stability under ordinary daily pressure. And it does all of this gradually, over weeks and months and years, in ways that are easy to accommodate one day at a time and impossible to fully see from inside. Research into early burnout recognition confirms that the inability to detect one's own declining health is itself one of the features of the condition as it progresses. This is why so many people are genuinely shocked when a doctor, a partner, or a crisis forces them to stop. From inside the experience, they were simply managing, coping, getting by. The same internal system responsible for monitoring your well-being is also the system most impaired by the very condition you are trying to detect. You cannot see it clearly from inside, which is precisely why these 8 signs matter. Not because noticing them will fix everything immediately, but because recognition is the prerequisite for every meaningful step that follows from here. You cannot change a pattern you believe is normal. You cannot address a deficit you have decided is permanent. You cannot recover from something you have stopped believing you deserve to recover from. Recovery from this kind of accumulated depletion is real. Sleep architecture can be restored when the conditions for deep, uninterrupted sleep are consistently provided night after night over time. The dopamine system can recalibrate when chronic stress is genuinely reduced, and the nervous system is given space to regulate itself rather than remaining in a state of constant activation. Physical energy returns when the body is no longer locked in sustained conservation mode. Emotional resilience rebuilds when the prefrontal cortex is given the resources it requires to function well. The headaches ease, the visual strain reduces. The body begins to feel more like its own version of normal again. That quiet sense of wrongness gradually and noticeably lifts. These are not abstract promises. They are biological processes with well-documented timelines. The body wants to recover. It is designed for recovery. What it needs is permission and the right conditions. But none of that begins while you are still insisting you are fine. It starts the moment you decide to take the whispers seriously and respond to them honestly. Your body has been communicating through every one of these signs, through the mornings that felt impossible, through the music that stopped resonating the way it once did, not with a dramatic overhaul, not with a perfect plan. Often it starts simply with acknowledging that the way you have been feeling is not acceptable as a permanent state of being. Through the heaviness in your legs, the patience that disappeared, the headaches, the strained eyes, and the quiet, persistent sense that something inside you was simply not right. It was doing exactly what bodies do when they are carrying more than they were designed to carry indefinitely, without rest, without recovery, without genuine space to repair and return. It was asking to be heard, and the fact that you ignored those signals does not make you irresponsible. It makes you someone doing their best in a world that rarely slows down. But now that you recognize the signals for what they are, something different is genuinely possible. You are a biological system with real requirements that cannot be suspended forever without consequence. The human body was not designed to operate indefinitely under the conditions most people now accept as ordinary. Constant stimulation, fragmented sleep, and unrelenting pressure were never part of the original design. They are recent demands placed on a very ancient system, and that system is doing exactly what any system does when asked to exceed its capacity for too long. It signals, it warns, it asks, in the only language biology has available, for the conditions it needs in order to genuinely recover and return to full function. Rest is not a reward for finishing everything else. Recovery is not something you earn after the list is finally clear. They are the foundation that makes everything else sustainable. Without them, everything you are building and every relationship you are trying to show up for is being constructed on ground that is slowly and quietly eroding beneath you. The moment you stop treating exhaustion as evidence of dedication and start treating it as the signal it actually is, something meaningful shifts in how you relate to your own body. You start listening instead of arguing. You start building conditions that allow recovery to actually occur. And over time, you find your way back to someone who is not just surviving. Your body has been whispering for a long time. It has been patient. It has kept going even when you gave it very little to work with day after day. It is not too late to start listening to what it has been trying to tell you. It is not too late to give it what it has always needed.